Visit Stockholm today, a city of culture, prosperity, a population of millions, and many attractions, including living manifestations of guilt and hatred, funny accents, shambly boy, crawly boy, tall boy. Where will your journey take you? Stockholm. Ah, Cry of Fear, the first survival horror game I ever played. And yes, it took until 2013 for me to play a horror game. Fuck off. This, as a matter of fact, is a total conversion for the Gold Source engine, and in case zero of what I just said made any sense, it's a mod for the original Half-Life that's a full playable game in of itself, even if it requires using another game as a shell to run it. This mod was released in February 2012 by the individuals over at Team Sassaska, the same developers behind Afraid of Monsters, another total conversion mod that I've not played myself and only know about due to my friend Scarfulu doing a review on it last year, hence why I had to stand my ground before him when declaring that this game was mine to review, which is my fancy way of saying I pestered him on Discord, but details. Due to a Linux support update for the original Half-Life that caused every Half-Life mod to essentially break due to a change in engine and folders, Cry of Fear was restored as a standalone title on Steam in April 2013 that 14-year-old Joseph immediately scooped up when he saw the funny people on the internet were screaming at it. But a 2012 total conversion for a game from 1998 that spent 4 years in development. It's certainly an interesting game to pick apart. Like, is Cry of Fear an effective horror game? Or is it at the very least fun and well designed? Welcome. In this spooky period of cosplay and razor blades, join me as we switch on the projector. Come on, just fuck it. Sorry, I don't have thumbs. There we go. So when describing the premise of Cry of Fear as concisely as possible, the game has you assume the role of Simon, a teenager who wakes up in an alleyway in Stockholm, Sweden, not remembering anything that happened prior, because it ain't a horror game without some of that delicious amnesia. While fighting demented creatures, solving inventory puzzles, and journeying through the twisted world the game has to offer, you're left to survive and figure out just what the hell is going on. To be expected from the game's total conversion roots, it plays in lieu of Half-Life with a generous amount of its own survival horror elements sprinkled on top. But how do the devs instill fear into players and really build tension as they play through the game? Jump scares is the answer to that question. Very dumb jump scares with spooky things and loud noises and But it's unfair to judge a horror game this way, as Cry of Fear certainly makes an effort in its atmosphere. This mod is a technical marvel in achieving this level of visuals on an engine released in 1998. By using a modified version of the Gold Source engine, the dev team managed to make use of an entirely new renderer as opposed to the original Half-Life one, helping them go all out in terms of the little things like lighting and skyboxes to make a really detailed environment. And yes, I vaguely said the dev team because I still can't pronounce Team Succulent properly. Live with it. The map design is fantastic, with nearly every environment being directly taken from real-world locations. While I haven't visited the city myself, Cry of Fear's depiction of Stockholm feels very real and natural as you journey through its streets, and combined with the lighting, it adds to the horror in a way. It's kind of funny and almost breathtaking looking at the reference pictures of abandoned buildings, walls lined with graffiti and dimly lit high streets. Saying this will make me sound like a complete ponce, but it shows that reality is the perfect setting for horror. I always find that the most effective horror is that of realism. That's not to say the game doesn't like to pull its own whimsical dumb shit like the enemy design and some of the more nightmarish maps and set pieces, but the city has a sense of relatability to it. It gave me comfort in slower paced areas of the game, but it also reminded me of times I was outside in the dark, fearful of who or what I'd come across when walking alone. And I think that's what Cry of Fear does so well. It handles tone excellently. It executes different types of horror and transitions between them to make the game much more unpredictable and far from exhausting to play. One map can be an eerie stroll with the occasional encounter that puts you on edge. Another map can be nightmarish and abusive as you scramble for any option at your disposal. And some maps can have zero horror to them. A nice calming moment that eases you back in later to remind you that you're never truly safe. Of course, limitations can show through when it comes to stuff like human character models and cutscenes, but I guess I can let it slide considering the development background. It's still pretty hilarious.
Yes, I do. I want to know just what in the fuck is going on here.
But how is the gameplay? This is a game, so it's like it needs gameplay. As I said earlier, it shares elements of Half-Life by being a linear action adventure, progressing map to map, killing enemies, surviving, you get the idea. With the arsenal the game gives you combined with some limitations, Cry of Fear reaches a balance between fun action game and tense horror game. Ammunition is quick to recover, but it's small in numbers to discourage getting aggressive. Health pickups heal significantly, but they're hard to come by. And to top it off, you have a very limited inventory for not just weapons, but also healing and key items. So you really need to prioritize your gear to ensure that you're only carrying what you need in the moment, and not some powerful weapon that you're saving for emergencies. The game is filled with a whole bunch of small mechanics that enrich the supply management and combat. When you leave your phone's torch on and put it away, it stays lit in your bag, leaving a small circle of light around you. When you reload, you swap out the entire magazine, so any leftover bullets in your last mag disappear permanently. And the best feature of all, a dodge mechanic that lets you dash in any direction you want, instantly awarding Cry of Fear a game developed on a Valve engine that actually has fun melee combat award. You don't count. Again, it reaches a balance between the two genres, and during my many playthroughs, neither genre felt overshadowed by the other. Combat never felt like a tedious obligation, even when I was reduced to just my melee weapons. And the moment I reached a point in the game where I felt a bit too prepared for the upcoming danger, the game was willing to throw the occasional curveball to put me back on edge, especially when nearing the end of a long and grueling objective. Feel a bit too comfortable using that trusty phone as a torch? Well, tough shit, the battery's out, so you better get through this pitch black section of the game with a limited quantity of flares. This dim flickering red light isn't making you uncomfortable, is it? But remember the advice bestowed upon us by the Cry of Fear wiki. You are playing a horror game, not a lame-ass shooter. And when you click on the lame-ass shooter hyperlink, it takes you to a Wikipedia article for the Call of Duty series. Sweet.
Royston! Royston, come to the gazebo! I roasted the casual, but good!
So essentially this means we have puzzles. My favourite kind, to be precise, backtracking inventory ones. Hooray. Yes, past combat, Cry of Fear has the occasional roadblock that requires a degree of exploration and finding the required inventory items to progress. And I'm somewhat mixed with the execution of these. Mostly due to the issue of where do I go? It varies throughout, but some chapters of Cry of Fear aren't exactly the most straightforward, and they fall flat on their face when guiding the player. To give the game credit, you're able to view notes and objectives at any time, and any keys you pick up typically have notes attached of what they're for, but it's when I start circling around an apartment for 10 plus minutes trying to keep a mental note of everything that I'm close to getting upset. And it especially doesn't help when these slower sections of the game try to implement platforming. I don't have too much of an issue with first-person platforming fundamentally, but not only are you doing it in Gold Source of all things, you're doing it with a stamina bar. You can have one or the other, and when I'm trying to get immersed in a survival horror game, it kinda gets in the way when I'm squatting on a platform like a twat trying to wait for my stamina to regenerate. I will say this is a rare occurrence, and I'm only talking about my personal experience, so please take this with a grain of salt. But what made the inventory puzzles of games like Resident Evil and The Room so well done is you were more or less presented with all the information, materials, and environment layouts you needed. So even if you were still stumped, you had a general idea of what you needed to do. Cry of Fear, on the other hand, does a really bad job of reincorporating maps or puzzle elements, as it doesn't so much as hint at something being important or worth remembering for later on. Like, okay, I need 2 fuses and one is located in Saxon Avenue. Where is Saxon Avenue again? Deja Vu, I just been to this place before. Okay, but once you know what you're doing and where you're going, these obstacles work. Just not the platforming, Jesus Christ, never again. These encounters are fun to play, and unlike other games that try to work inventory objectives into combat-centric gameplay, there's synergy to it. So it doesn't feel like an interruption that's killing the flow of the game and preventing you from having a nice time, cough cough. Let me tell you about one of my favourite areas in the game. To get through this gate, I need to find a fuse, and upon tracking down some clues, I'm led to this college. It's bright, clean, safe, and even though there's no one to be found, it's almost as if nothing happened in here. That is until you get to the power and realise, oh, there's only one fuse left. Yep, there's no escaping the terror. Have fun fighting monsters in the dark. Oh, and by the way, if you try exiting out the way you came, it's locked. Don't worry, you'll be fine. I'll see you on the other side because I'm going to shut my PC, take a plane to Ibiza, and never come back. Okay, bye. These types of set pieces are instances of Cry of Fear at its best, but I wouldn't say its horror is perfect, mostly because of the implementation of jump scares. I'd like to start by saying that jump scares are not a fundamentally bad element of horror. It depends on how it's implemented and whether the style and presentation of the horror demands it. It's fun to get the shit scared out of you. Ghost trains and slasher flicks are popular for a reason, but Cry of Fear's use of jump scares just do not sit well with me, mostly because it already proves itself without them. It has its atmosphere, it has its loud, nightmarish moments, but a lot of the scares used outside of those have zero build up to them, and they feel more like the game poking you to see if you're still awake. There is such a thing as doing too much. You're not really done when there's no more to add, you're done when there's nothing more to take away, and I think the jump scares of Cry of Fear illustrate that point so much. So, I don't think I've talked about the plot yet, have I? Primary reason is because I don't think this game's story is for me. Cry of Fear presents a narrative that reveals itself through cutscenes and is somewhat comparable to that of the Silent Hill series, where the game wants you to ask questions about more or less everything that's happening. The reason why I don't feel comfortable in giving a verdict about the plot is because, in regards to presentation, subject matter and so on, I don't believe it's a plot that was written for me. It didn't strike a chord with me personally, and I'll be honest, the game gets pretty laughable at times, so it's very difficult to judge in my perspective whether or not it was a well-told story. What I will say, however, is that it does a fine job from a horror standpoint, and if it achieved anything, it certainly made me uncomfortable while playing. Let me just play you the background music from one of the later areas in the game. Like, that's legitimately unsettling, and the game knew exactly how to get under my skin while I played it. So, Cry of Fear is overall a weird game. It has a lot of glaring faults and frustrations and is not for everyone, but despite all that, I still enjoyed myself. Even if elements of horror and story miss their mark, there's still fun to be had here, and I think it acted as a good first impression on what I would come to expect from the survival horror genre in future.
What do the trees do? I don't know what the trees do, and I'm afraid of the trees. They don't just...
And did I mention that this game is completely free to play? With a 6-hour story mode, co-op, custom campaigns by fans, and a whole bunch of unlocks, it's a steal quite frankly, and I'd recommend giving it a go whenever you can. Again, there's a standalone version on Steam that you can just download for free and play, so you won't need to fuss about modding it onto Half-Life or anything along those lines. And if you do end up enjoying it, I'd recommend throwing a couple of quid at the developers to reward them for their hard work. It's also pretty good for live streams, so how about it, Twitch mutuals? Why not shriek a bit this Halloween for our entertainment? Cry of Fear is a game of ambition. It fucks up a lot, but it's an enjoyable product that I recommend giving a go for your horror fix this year. Survival horror is a slippery slope though. I'm just glad I didn't make any uninformed hot takes like, I don't know, Resident Evil 4 isn't a fun video game.